Watch this.
It's Friday. You know what that means? We made it to the end of the week. On the 208, President Trump is fully back in the news cycle. Today's topic, a continuation of the conversation of canceling him from the ballot. Not something that is likely here, but it's still making our Secretary of State interested in the conversation. How do you find out if the homeless population is increasing? Well, you ask. That's what Our Path Home did today as they gathered information for this point-in-time survey directly for the people impacted. You all had a lot of great comments and questions this week. So, as we do on Fridays, we're giving a little extra time to show some of the comments, thoughts, suggestions that we had to skim over on the 208. It's one night out of the year, but its outcome determines the need for resources nationwide. Our Path Home is currently collecting data for the annual point-in-time count. It's to measure the amount of Ada County's homeless population, but only on the night of January 24th. Because of the tight window, we know it's not an entirely accurate figure. Local social workers know people will slip through the cracks. But as Andrew Bartline learned today, the trends are pretty clear.
It's hard to put a number on it.
How many people are literally experiencing homelessness?
But it's a figure the feds need.
An annual report to Congress.
And only made possible by local boots on the ground.
Yeah.
Casey Mattoon manages the Ada County Count.
I've always had an orientation towards issues like this. Like, how is this the collective community saying, yeah, we're okay with this?
Annual point-in-time counts go back to 2012, where numbers have peaked and dipped, but remain largely unchanged over the last decade. That's due to how the count is conducted.
That we can have a conversation with on the day that we're measuring.
And we know this is just the floor.
It's a difference of hundreds.
To qualify for the count, Casey and his team first need to find people and make face-to-face contact.
I was walking around at 4 a.m., like in this same area down the Greenbelt, doing interviews with folks.
Then that person has to actually want to be part of the count too.
And some folks just don't want to engage, and either one of those things is totally okay.
Finally, they must meet the actual definition of homeless.
They're staying in a temporary emergency shelter, temporary housing, which is a very specific program. Or they're on the streets, in their car, or in a place that's not meant for human habitation.
It's reality for hundreds in Ada County alone.
A lot of this work feels really personal about the community.
And local social workers say there's no secret behind the problem.
Housing in this community remains unaffordable.
And less common. The annual housing inventory count shows the number of emergency shelter beds has increased significantly over the last decade. That's the teal line on top. But transitional beds, rapid rehousing beds, and permanent supportive housing, it's all dropped over that same period. It's reality that's in the way of the overarching goal.
End homelessness in our community.
But it doesn't have to be.
It's not a question of whether or not we can do it. It's a question of whether or not we get enough actors and funders leaning in to scale what we know works to address the problem that is in our community.
The official count numbers won't be available for a few months, but it's hovered around 700 people for the last several years, though the 2021 data is largely inaccurate because COVID stopped a boots-on-the-ground street count. Casey today advocated for a broad housing investment and availability. We also know the partner organizations, there's about 30 of them that work with Our Path Home. They support a housing first model. So the idea behind that, Joe, is you put somebody into housing. Maybe they're struggling to find employment. Perhaps there's someone that's struggling with addiction. Well, those other factors fall into place once those basic needs are met. That seems to be a very common thread among those partner organizations that work on this.
And I'm just curious for my own information, will they have a published survey or a published report that we could read more into?
Yeah, and that report goes to Congress, and it's from every individual local area around the country. This is for Ada County specific. But yeah, it'll have those numbers. The trends go back to 2012, but seems pretty stable in the homeless population here locally.
Interesting. Well, you made a good point in your story. You know, how do you know? Well, you have to ask. Andrew Bartline reporting here on the 208 on Friday. Thank you very much, Andrew. Well, maybe the hottest topic across politics right now, should former President Donald Trump be allowed on the ballot? It's been a very new venture in recent months. Some states are working through if Trump should be banned from the ballot because of his role in the January 6 incidents at the Capitol. Insurrection, many are calling it. Colorado and Maine, they both made headlines in the recent past for going down that path. In fact, Colorado Supreme Court even has already said, no, Trump should not be on our ballot. The decision, though, in all 50 states on the topic, it could vary, putting Secretary of States in an odd position. I sat down this afternoon with Idaho Secretary of State Phil McGrain, my goodness, to get a pulse on the topic and what he and his colleagues are following.
We obviously have a very significant election coming up this year. I'm sure all of the viewers are well aware of that.
Idaho Secretary of State Phil McGrain, along with 49 of his colleagues, will run the 2024 election cycle from east to west, north to south. One catch causing concern: will all 50 states have matching ballots?
Starting back in September, we started to receive inquiries from all around the country in terms of what to do regarding President Trump and access to the ballot. That really started us to look at it and to me to talk to some of my peers. I think at the core of the issue, though, is really democracy is about giving people a voice. And one of the things we're seeing is that being tested in terms of what choices people will have on the ballot.
Voters and officials in some states point to the 14th Amendment as a reason why Donald Trump should not be allowed on the ballot. 14th Amendment states that no person shall hold office if they engaged in insurrection or rebellion. And some believe the former president did that on January 6, 2021. Others don't. Colorado Supreme Court has already ruled to remove Trump.
This can't be a 50-state solution. Having each of the secretaries make independent decisions is only going to further polarize our country. We're going to end up with differing decisions. So you'll see blue states do one thing, red states do another. That's not healthy for the system.
McGrain, along with 10 other secretaries of state, filed this brief with the United States Supreme Court as that court weighs if states like Colorado can remove Trump. McGrain and his colleagues are asking SCOTUS for direction and a unified ruling for all 50 states. They also argue that secretaries of state do not and should not have the power to disqualify federal candidates under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. They warn in their brief of a parade of horribles if they have the power to disqualify in this circumstance, and fears of partisan abuse, tit-for-tat disqualifications.
We're going to be gathering here in 2 weeks to talk about everything leading up as just secretaries of state. I think one of the big things, this is a ministerial function. We are largely the referee of the elections process, trying to make sure, regardless of party affiliation, regardless of where you sit on the political spectrum, that you can have confidence that when you head to the polls, your vote's going to count.
Complicated nature of it all is hard to follow for voters from coast to coast. In Maine, for example, the Secretary of State, Sheena Bellows, ruled that Trump didn't qualify for the ballot. McGrain called to check in on the development.
She highlighted that, she put a stay on her own decision, hoping that the Supreme Court would weigh in on it. I think there is this collective, looking for guidance. There's a lot of amped up pressure related to this election, especially following the 2020 election. I know voters in Idaho are concerned about the process.
The United States Supreme Court will hear arguments beginning on February 8th in this case. SCOTUS will make a major decision shaping politics, no matter what they rule.
And I think collectively we don't want to be making separate and different individual decisions. And so hopefully this case coming up will resolve that.
What are you hoping for, as soon as possible?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of attention on this. I think the court recognizes also that this is a hot topic. Hopefully I'll be watching this closely just to see what guidance they give us. But the election's already underway. So any decisions that have to be made soon. When we have our own cases here in the state of Idaho that we're watching closely as well. I can't emphasize enough, everyone thinks of even our primary election, May 21st sounds far away, but for us running the elections, it feels like it's right up on us right now to get everything ready.
And thank you to Secretary of State Phil McGrain for his time today. We will be checking in with him as, again, this goes through the court process. We'll keep a close eye on this. Again, expected to hit SCOTUS February 8th. Well, speaking of Donald Trump, we were flooded with comments this week after our Idaho representatives endorsed Trump as the presidential candidate for the Republican Party earlier this week. So if you've been with us a while, then on Fridays we like to take the time to go back and play some comment catch-up. Here's what you had to say about the Trump endorsements.
After Ron DeSantis suspended his campaign on Sunday, we heard from Senators Mike Crapo and Jim Risch and Congressman Mike Simpson. All of them threw support behind Trump on Monday. Then on Tuesday, we asked Senator Mike Crapo about his turnaround from 2016 when he didn't officially endorse Trump.
America should choose the person who will strengthen this country.
So what did you all have to say? Well, Ronnie said, kudos to you, Brian and staff, for calling our senators and congressmen out on their flip-flop thoughts on Donald Trump. I don't understand how people can justify and say this man represents the core values that we as a nation should have when he clearly does not have those core values. Karen in Boise said, I'm voting for Trump as I want a better country to live in versus what's been happening the past 4 years. I'm a victim of crime you place in Mr. Trump, but still want change. He can do that. Haley said, I can understand Crapo not endorsing Biden, but he could have endorsed Haley. Sherry said, the majority of Idahoans believe in rule and law and know what core values are. Too bad our politicians do not. Dan says you should ask our legislators at what point is too many crimes and too many immoral acts to be too much. Mike in Nampa said, after 55 years here in Idaho, my identity as a Republican has been teetering. With the endorsements of Trump by our senators and representatives, the direction our state reps are taking us, I no longer want to be associated with the Republican Party. Jill says, I have always thought that any presidential ballot should have a third box to check. None of the above. We are going to need it more than ever this time. And JR says, there should have been a law that no one can be president if they're over 70 years of age.
And we're going to have some more of your viewer comments on some other topics coming up just in a few minutes.
I know the fog can often make us feel quite gloomy because it'll be so gray outside, but that's such a wonderful positive side of it, right? Such beautiful views created by the fog. But we aren't talking about fog as much this weekend, but we are going to be seeing some more mild temperatures and some light moisture, mainly as rain, even in mountain areas. So as we look for the temperatures this weekend, the high temperatures will be among the 40s and 50s in Treasure Valley spots, a little bit cooler over in Magic Valley. Fairfield will fall on the cooler side of this, more towards that 38 mark. But again, on the more dry side with all the moisture that we are expecting, and then mountains expected to be in the upper 30s and upper 40s as we go into Sunday. Warmer air is working its way in right now along with a cold front. So we are seeing some light showers starting to move into the area. However, even though we can see them on the radar, I don't think too much of this is actually making it to the ground right now. due in part because we have those warmer temperatures. So we get increased evaporation with the drier and warmer air at the surface. But I think as we go into the evening hours tonight and overnight hours, that's when we'll start to see more of that make it to the surface. And you can see by early tomorrow morning, we expect more of those light showers to work their way in. Also, as we go into tomorrow afternoon, we'll see the snow levels rise, and you'll see even less areas showing up in that white or pink as we go into Saturday and Sunday, really scaling back on Sunday as that warmer air continues to work its way through. So for the snow level today, we are looking at roughly 7,000 to 8,000 feet. So that means that if you're below around 7,500 feet, mainly you'll see a rain-snow mix. Areas at that 7,500 foot mark as about a half inch of snow to an inch of snow. And I think it will be really hard to even see that quite stack up, because when we get this wet, heavy snow, it tends to all kind of squish down and not as light and powdery as we see with some of the drier snow. So I think that it will be a little bit tougher to tell where that is accumulating, and again, already light accumulations as well. But as we go back to valley locations in Boise, you can see those more mild temperatures sticking around throughout the weekend. 53, the expected high for Sunday. And you can see as we go into next week as well, we're expecting more of those 50-degree highs.
Back to viewer comments, this time about the Idaho legislature, which you all love to talk about. So do we. Works out great. Well, this week we focused on 6 different pieces of legislation dealing with language definitions like fetus and gender, as well as mandatory minimums. We also touched on arming school employees with guns, calling out deep AI fakes and campaign ads, and expanding the Attorney General's power to the county level. So, before we get to your comments, let's see where all of this is with the legislation. Monday, we kick things off with Representative Julianne Young, or as she liked to call herself,
I'm a word girl. I'm an English nerd.
Word up, it's word girl. House Bill 400 wants to change wording in state law from fetus to preborn child because Young says the concept is a neutral change that clears up confusion between medical and legal definitions. Others who testify disagree.
This, in turn, potentially makes anyone who miscarries a potential felon.
So they listened, and House Bill 400 was held in committee on Monday. Tuesday was back at it with more words in House Bill 421, proposing to make the word gender mean the same as sex when referring to male or female. But she doesn't want gender to be considered synonymous with basically transgender stuff. Planned Parenthood said that's not the case when it comes to gender and sex. House Bill 421 was printed on Wednesday and referred to the Judiciary Rules and Administration. The Judiciary Rules and Administration Committee was busy on Tuesday with House Bill 406, which does two things. Adds fentanyl to the list of drugs in Idaho that carry a mandatory minimum sentence, and creates the crime of drug-induced murder. So if you supply fentanyl and it kills that person, you can be arrested, charged, and tried for murder.
We're going to keep people from dying if we don't move on this.
Despite hesitations from lawmakers like locking up a kid with user amounts, House Bill 406 was sent to the full House without a recommendation for what lawmakers should do when it gets there. So far, it's made it to its third reading on the House floor, which is slated for Monday. On Wednesday, State Affairs introduced House Bill 415, which allows Idaho teachers and staff to have guns on school property instead of hiring guards.
Having more guns in my school doesn't make me feel any safer.
Despite overwhelming opposition, House Bill 415 passed 11-2, right along party lines. Its second reading on the House floor was today. The third reading is scheduled for next week. Yesterday, Thursday, State Affairs Committee introduced us to House Bill 426, which is sponsored by both sides of the aisle. It says any AI-generated ad that impersonates a candidate must be clearly labeled during electioneering windows.
I fully expect that we will see this deployed against us if we don't act now.
The only opposition to this bill was that it didn't go far enough, but still, it passed, was printed today, and is filed for a second reading on the House floor. Last but not least, House Bill 390.
We get calls all the time about issues with city elected officials and other people, and we always have to explain we don't have the authority to do that.
But the bill will change that, expanding the Attorney General's power to investigate city and county officers. House Bill 390 passed without much opposition and was read for the second time today. It's filed for a third reading on the House floor. And that's a legislative wrap. And we'll continue to keep an eye on all of those pieces of legislation and let you know updates on the big ones and, of course, anything else that pops up. But one bill we wanted to circle back to right now was on House Bill 415, and that is the one proposing arming school staff to protect the students. And you all had a lot to say about this one specifically, so just a few again. Here's Andrew Bartline.
Let's see what you had to say about House Bill 415. Robert in Boise said, trained gun carriers were present at Uvalde Elementary. Everyone knows the outcome of more good guys with a gun in that situation. This idea will eventually be regretted. Katie Gray says, let school staff carry, open or concealed, but also be certain they are properly trained. Dave from Caldwell chimes in with, it is interesting that nobody with a concealed carry permit is allowed to enter the building while carrying a gun in order to testify on a bill that would allow them to carry in a school. David in Boise asked, under what level of threat may a teacher use their weapon? If a student assaults him or her with fists only, for example, can the teacher use lethal force? What if two students are engaged in a knife fight?
And already here on Friday afternoon, we know there's a lot slated for the State House on Monday, so be sure to tune into the 208 Monday to get the latest with the legislature. And as always, you can text, call, and email us anytime at the contact information on your screen. If texting isn't your thing, no problem. You never know when we'll get to your comment. Plus, if you miss any of our 208 programs, they're all available to watch daily on the KTVB YouTube page in its entirety and on KTVB Plus. We'll wrap up with your live comments in just a minute. All right, let's get to a lot of your comments here right now. We save plenty of time for these. We'll start with this. Phil McGrain speaks of how everyone's vote should count in elections in Idaho. However, as a Democrat, my vote is a mere whisper because of the control the Republicans have in the state. When it comes to presidential elections, they also have a closed primary that nullifies the power of the Idaho people. Freedom, wonders Sean. Good question. And this person says, I don't think our country will survive another Biden and Democratic administration. Choices aren't going to be the best, but Trump is sadly the best one. Thank you for that comment, Bill. This person says Trump's most recent $83.3 million judgment, which was announced this afternoon, by the way, should negate his ability to run for president based on ethics, or in his case and his history, the lack of ethics. I will say that is a civil case, so this is not a criminal case. I've seen some other questions about that, so it likely won't play into this at all. This person says, January 6th was an insurrection, end of story, because some people are already shouting through the rooftop that it's rigged. Because of that fact and that alone, I believe that everybody should figure it out at the ballot box. And I'll tell you this, when I spoke with Secretary of State Phil McGrain, he and his colleagues, the Secretary of States across the country, they're talking about this already. So since 2020, a lot of steps have been taken across this country to really shore up voter trust in the system and transparency. So we'll see how this plays out. This person says, Joe, I'm under the impression that the section of the 14th Amendment, the third section that everyone keeps citing concerning Trump, was actually stricken from the Constitution in 1887 and only applied to those that had fought in the war. I will tell you, it is still on the books. It was put in the Constitution as a way to make sure that Confederate leaders didn't make the ballot. It is, though, still on the books, and we'll see if the Supreme Court agrees with the Democrats on this one. The 208, why not let Trump just be a write-in? He can't. He's officially on the ballot. But we'll get to more of your comments and questions next week. Have a great weekend.